Hello and welcome. My name is Andrew England. I'm a senior lecturer in radiography at Keele University and I'm also the associate editor for the Radiography Journal. And it's my pleasure to have been asked to talk about the reviewer's perspective and how to respond to reviews when you're submitting articles for publication. These are my financial disclosures. I'm associate editor for the Radiography Journal. So what am I hoping you're going to learn from this talk? To understand a bit more about the peer review process. So what is peer review? What are the steps necessary for successful peer review? Hopefully some of you either do or would like to consider being a reviewer at some point in the future. So what necessitates a good quality review? And if you're an author, how best to respond to reviewers' comments, because that's one of the tricks in terms of getting published. So I'm really going to focus, as I've said, on radiography, which is the journal that I'm associated with. But in terms of radiography within our profession, there is essentially a big four. There's four main journals which we usually go to in terms of our work for publication. That's radiography, the Journal of Medical Radiation Sciences, which is typically the Australian journal, Journal of Medical Imaging and Radiation Sciences, JMIRS, that's usually considered to be the Canadian journal, and Radiologic Technology is the American journal. And again, they all obviously have a journal, they have a website platform for submissions, they have an editorial board, and every article that's submitted to those journals will get sent out for peer review. And peer review is an essential process whereby journal articles are considered, revised and accepted, and then we see them published either in print when they arrive through our doors or electronically on websites and via various search engines. So first of all, perhaps we need to understand why would we need to have a peer review process? Why can't we not just simply write up our work, whether it be an experiment, a review article, a letter to the editor? Why can that just simply not be published? Why do we need to be able to send this to others to be reviewed? And typically within journals, they use what we call a blinded peer review process. So the journal send out the work, the person who receives it doesn't have any idea who the author is. They submit their comments. The authors receive those, and again, they don't know who the reviewer is, and that's called double-blind peer review. And most journals use that. So why peer review? Why is it important to get extra pair of eyes? There's an editor, there's an editorial team. Well, it helps ensure integrity. We want our journals to have the highest quality of information. Journals, as we know, are taken incredibly seriously when we talk about scientific findings and evidence, and the peer review process supports this. It gives an element of independent scrutiny. I'm an editor, there's obviously my fellow editors for radiography. We can only know so much, we can never know everything, and also there's an element that we're working within the journal. So in order to have independent scrutiny, we often need to send it out, particularly when we need to get expert opinion in areas that are not familiar to us. And I think when I work in academia, I always teach my students that really getting people to look at your work, getting multiple eyes on a piece of work increases the chance of weaknesses being spotted, and it gives the authors a chance to address them. So it basically increases the quality of the work. And I can't emphasize that enough, that a peer review process should be supportive. It's not designed purely to reject papers, it's designed to help improve the quality. And we can only benefit from that as a profession. It does prevent dissemination of irrelevant findings, unwarranted claims and personal views. It really allows what's been submitted to be tested. And really, if it passes peer review, then to a degree it has an element of quality. Now, there are accepted issues with the peer review process, which I won't really talk about, but I suppose peer review is accepted. You can see from this graphic, there's many graphics really describing the peer review process as being incredibly rigorous. And if you do get through it, you've produced material of a certain standard. And the peer review allows the reviewers to judge the quality and the significance in a wider context. So as a reviewer, as an editor, you're going to have your own very, very, I suppose, specific context, whereas by sending it wider, you can understand whether something's going to be of benefit and importance to the readership. So the next question is really, who can peer review? You submit your work to the journal, and then it goes off to be reviewed by a journal appointed reviewer. Who is this? Who is this person? Well, this person must be registered with the journal as a reviewer. This can be anyone. You can self-register, you can be invited to register, you can be encouraged to register, and this can be an academic, it can be a clinician, it can be somebody who's considered to be an expert in a particular field, but ultimately it needs to be somebody who's willing to help. This is a voluntary role, it's unpaid, and the journal needs radiographers. It's readership. It doesn't primarily have to be a radiographer. The majority will be, because of the nature of the journal, who are prepared to give their time to review articles, really to increase the quality of the journal and benefit the profession. So the pool we tend to use are those that are registered. Sometimes we use what we call unregistered reviewers. So we can ask somebody in a particular field, we can enlist them. So as an editor, if it's a particular field that we don't seem to have the expertise, I could go to somebody in that area and ask would they be willing, and that might be a one-off, or certainly one that we don't use that often. And so it will be a combination, but the bulk of it will be those in the database. And as I said, anyone can apply. How often you'll use will depend on your experience, and will also depend on the subject area. But we do have a process where we bring in new reviewers and try and support them into becoming more experienced reviewers. We also allow author suggestions, but we do have to be careful that obviously the author is going to have a reason for suggesting that person. We have got to consider whether that maybe would introduce some bias. So whilst it is a consideration, it may be utilised. Obviously, the author will never know because it's a blinded process. Those are the sort of three areas in which we can get people for peer review. So obviously you're giving to the journal, which is gratefully received, but at the same time there's a development opportunity for you as a reviewer in terms of seeing the work that's coming through and thinking about how you can help that author team get the best possible publication. So I'd now like to explain a little about the peer review process. This focuses on the radiography journal, but this is going to be indifferent regardless of the journal that you submit to. So as an author, you prepare a manuscript and you submit to the journal. The journals will check initially to check that it fits in with the requirements of the journal, the instruction for the authors. Does it have the right word count? Is it in the right style? If it meets all these checks, then it will get sent to the editor-in-chief. So for the radiography journal, this is Professor Julie Nightingale, and Julie will do several things. She will look at the article and see whether it initially meets the scope, the aims and objectives. So if it was on marine farming or fisheries, then obviously it wouldn't be within the scope and it would be rejected. If it does fit within the scope of the journal, then it will either be handled by Julie or she will send it to one of the associate editors for handling. So one of the editors, be it the editor-in-chief or the associate editor, will then review the article and will select reviewers to undertake the peer review process. So the journal will be stripped of any identifiable information and it will be sent to two reviewers, blind, and the editor will select the viewers based on their experience, based on their subject areas, based on their availability. So it gets sent out electronically via a website. The reviewers get asked, they accept hopefully, and then they will send their reviews back to the journal. The editor will then pick up these reviews, they will look at the submission, and then they will make one of three decisions. It will be either accepting the manuscript with no changes, very rarely happens. It will be to revise the manuscript in order to improve things, or to reject. Now this will be based on the editor's experience but also from the reviews received, and a revision will be requested based on the guidance of the reviewers. So if they need more detail in a particular area, they need some questions answered, this will be requested in the revision. Often the revision will then go back to the original reviewers for checking. But ultimately the editor, when they're satisfied a revision is now acceptable, will accept the article. The one exception is a rejection, and that's really when the reviewers and the editor don't feel that the article's of sufficient standard, sufficient importance, and it can really be dealt with in a revision. and the article will be rejected and the authors can take it to another journal article. So what makes a good review? If you're asked by one of the editorial team of radiography to do a review and you accept, what makes a good review? Well, you've got to commit time. The author has spent hours, days, weeks preparing the manuscript. So you've got to be able to give it, due consideration. So you've got to be able to read it from cover to cover, usually 2 or 3 times, and really show that you understand, have they got a clear question? Have they used clear research methods? Have they presented results which answer that research question? And that's what you need to tell the editor. And if they've not, you either need to make it clear whether it's a non-starter, so maybe the question is that far away from the methods that you can't see any sort of future in it, or you need to give some clear recommendations as to how more detail needed in the methods, results need to be more aligned with the research questions. So you need to make it clear to me as an editor, are you saying that this work with extra effort can meet the standard? Is it already at the standard, or actually can you not see this being publishable in radiography? And remember, it's your opinion, so nobody will hold you to that. We're asking for your opinion, and that's obviously opinion of one. We get other information to make the decision. So clear recommendation to me as an editor, but also your recommendations to the authors. If you want to see an improvement in the literature, improvement in how the results are presented, then say so. And you'll really remember what we're asking for in a journal article is to improve our evidence base. So we need to get the authors to be able to give us that evidence base. And you should do that as a reviewer really with what we call minimal bias. So try not to, if you don't particularly like an area, maybe it's an area of imaging that you maybe don't feel is appropriate. But again, you're not asked necessarily about that. You're asked about the quality of the journal article. So on the opposite, what makes a bad review? Well, statements that are unjustified. I don't like this paper. This paper is unclear. Well, why is it unclear? Justify. The methods are unclear. Well, what bit? The detail around the X-ray equipment, the detail around what was happening to the patients. I don't like work in this area. You may be introducing some bias. Or a review really that focuses on an English language check. The journal's got other methods for ensuring that happens. We want the science. We want your opinion in your particular field. And we really want you to help support the author. So even if it is a reject, it's not necessarily a problem, but we want to encourage. We don't want to use provocative language. So in attempting to respond to reviewers' comments, I would always suggest that you've got to acknowledge the reviewer has given their time for free. So for example, we wish to thank the reviewers for their helpful comments. Try and be positive. Thank you for that comment. We have made the following change. Thank you for this comment. We've not made any changes because. So avoid being provocative and avoid trying to enrage the reviewer and justify either a change or even sometimes you say, actually, we've not made a change because. So what are my top tips for satisfying the reviewer? Show that you've spent time improving the manuscript. That's what they've given their time for, to show that you've taken that seriously on board. Thank the reviewer. Remember, they're doing it for free. Acknowledge positively that you know that they're trying to help you. Be careful if you're saying that you don't agree with something. That's valid, but again, be careful how you word that. Detail clearly how you've responded. Everything the reviewer suggests should be a response, even if it's we've done nothing. So have a reviewer comments file, but also show in the manuscript, maybe by a chat changes or a different colour, how things have changed. And in order to learn this process, I would suggest you perhaps consider becoming a reviewer. We're always looking out for reviewers, either novice or experienced. So that was a whistle-stop tour really about reviewing and how to respond to a reviewer's comments. If you've got any questions, I'd be delighted to answer them. I've got my email address there. Thank you very much for your attention.